Part 107. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 1077. Hills shuddered, feeling that this was really not a case of one family not entering the same house. These two brothers were both perverts, and their obsessions were almost exactly the same. Perhaps the reason why Su Fu failed to destroy Subai a while ago was because Su Fu underestimated Subai's obsession. Memory is hatred, life, and a part of his own existence. Memory, for Subai, said, the meaning is much deeper than ordinary people. It won't be long. Subai's soul circled the young man back and forth. This was Subai's promise and answer. Bai is not a good person, but Subai himself is not a good person either. The difference between the two is just that A and B were placed in different positions by Su Yuhang and Lu Menjiu. If Subai was put in Bai Er's position and faced with another guy occupying his body and living his life, the jealousy and anger would probably burn out all his sanity. However, when one of the parties has returned to dust, all these calculations have lost their original meaning. Now, Subai only has one answer. Promise. Subai didn't intend to expect anything towering and great. He just wanted to prove himself, clarify his past, see his present clearly, and grasp his future. As Lao Fugui once said, isn't it good to be a human being? For a person, the most important and down-to-earth things are these 3 points. Whether confused or stumbling, people are always recalling their past, blurring their present, and looking forward to their future. Perhaps this is the 3 tastes of human beings. Take it and call your parents to come down and accompany me soon. The young Subai gave his own answer. He is already dead, and maybe the one summoned by Huang Quan is not the real him, but what Subai wants is just an answer. Of course, Subai is more inclined to believe that this is the real Bai who willingly entrusted his memory and past to himself. The process is not very important here. All it takes is a final conclusion. Buzz. The boy's body began to become blurry, and Subai's soul, which had been floating around, finally entered his body. This was considered a ritual, an indispensable ritual. Finding your fault and clarifying your past is the first step to enlightenment. Next moment, the yellow spring water began to rise upwards, gradually overflowing the original shore. Even the tall altar that originally stored the Dian Kingdom's jade seal was submerged at this time. Most of the Eastern Enlightenment land was now submerged in the yellow spring. Underwater. Hills abided by his previous words. He did not leave, but continued to stand where he was. Even though Subai had reminded him before, Hills naturally had his own pride. However, the atmosphere suddenly changed in the next moment. In other words, everything before was just to gain momentum for this moment. The huge yellow spring was still flowing, seemingly never stopping, but at this time, its pattern changed dramatically, becoming square and square, like a rectangular container. Countless resentful souls howled inside, and countless wreckage bared their teeth and claws inside. The originally majestic feeling of suffocation and depression was now transformed into a chaotic chaos of demons dancing around. At this point, it's a bit like a nightmare that many people have experienced. It's so oppressive that you can barely breathe. This was also Subai's nightmare, and even this nightmare completely distorted Subai's personality. More than 10 years ago, a young man tried to crawl out of the culture fluid again and again, and he stuck his head out. Then, a middle-aged man reached out and held the boy's head again and again, pushing him back. A black cat kept turning the scrolls in front of him, and the boy could only continue to sink in the petri dish and continue to dream. Regardless of the right and wrong outside, the petri dish is like a wall that you can never climb over, and all you can do is to do your own thing in the wall day after day in front of the picture that the scroll wants you to see. Dream. There is nothing else you can do except dream, and once you wake up from the dream, the reality around you will sting even more. This time, The underworld has turned into the petri dish of the past. But Subai continued to sink in the petri dish. Perhaps this is a regret that was buried deep in his heart before, but now, he needs to make up for this regret. There were too many pitfalls in the first half of my life. Only by completing them can I be qualified to realize the Tao and have my own Tao. Subai, who had just integrated into the boy's body, opened his eyes. His eyes were red. As a bystander, Hills knew that Subai had completely absorbed his own emotions and thoughts. Boom! The rapids are surging. Subai's figure began to float upward. Just like a carp leaping over the dragon gate, it carries a sonorous thought. However, when Subai was about to surface, a white hand suddenly appeared from the void, bringing a heart-stopping pressure. This hand was very white and soft. It was a hand. The evenly distributed calluses on a man's hands mean that he often writes or draws with a pen. Hills in the water below could have been indifferent to Huan Quan's seduction and temptation, but at this moment he felt that his heart had lost its rhythm, and he had to cover his chest and kneel down on one knee. It's not just physical pressure, but more of it actually comes from the crushing at the soul level. This is a kind of will that does not allow for refutation. This kind of will may not have been so terrifying more than 10 years ago, but now, this kind of will has already undergone tremendous changes, and it represents more and more things. Things even involve an existence called rules. It wasn't until this moment that Hills truly understood why Subai chose this down-to-earth way to attain enlightenment, because people are really different. For example, the same two primary school students wrote essays about scientists. One primary school student wrote that his parents took him to the Science and Technology Museum to visit and study, which made him gain a lot. The other primary school student wrote that his parents were very busy, so he could only go to a neighbor's house to see it. Watch TV. However, the latter's neighbor is an academician. This example is really appropriate for Subai at this time. This is a place of enlightenment. Generations of geniuses have attained enlightenment here. Some have buried their shortcomings, some have buried their own skills, and some have buried their deep love. Some may be heroic or graceful, but they can all be regarded as masterpieces. As for Subai, his sermon is nominally about 3 nodes, past, present and future, but his past is nothing more than a family ethics drama. What he is doing now is just resisting his father's oppression of him when he was a child. It was a son who went back in time to question his father like a roar. Very down to earth, even humble. Even compared to the second sermon of Boss Liang in the past, it was still a bit too small. But there is no way. Subai's father is Su Yuhang. And Su Yuhang is now a broadcaster. Just like many people in modern times study ancient poetry, maybe the author himself did not think that much when he wrote this poem thousands of years ago, but later generations just explained too many innuendos and metaphors, and they always express strength, concern for the country and the people, and service. Great ideas such as the country. Therefore, at this time, Subai's so-called rebellion against his father. It can also be extended to rebel against broadcasting. This sermon. Subai pulled out that memory from somewhere, and even aroused the chi that belonged to Su Yuhang. And because Su Yuhang merged with the broadcast, the aura of the broadcast also joined the demonstration. In the game. This is no less than a thunderstorm. When Hills discussed the sermon with Subai for the first time, Hills thought that Subai was too petty and too influenced by the senior named Fugui. But now, Hills has just really realized that Subai was still the same Subai. He wants to play. Just play big. No wonder Subai was able to grit his teeth and suppress his tendency to directly attain enlightenment under Su Fu's coercion. Yes. Compared to the current scene. Compared to today's battle. No one who is enlightened wants to miss it. Once missed, it will be a lifelong regret. Moreover, if Subai can successfully achieve enlightenment this time, in a certain sense, it will be equivalent to stepping on the radio to reach the top. What he buried. It's the fear of parents and the fear of broadcasting. Once this tombstone is formed and dropped, it will eclipse all the tombstones under the yellow spring in the entire eastern land of enlightenment. Because this is the only one blessed by nature. Just as Lao Fugui is the only son of the plane in Su Fu's mouth. Sudbai's identity is also unique and cannot be copied. However, Hills is really feeling uncomfortable now. In the past, Boss Liang huddled up at the foot of his desk and burst into tears when faced with the presence of the broadcasting atmosphere. On the one hand, Boss Liang was indeed a bit timid, but on the other hand, it also showed that the oppression that radio exerted on listeners penetrated into the bone marrow. This was much worse than hypnosis is even more terrifying, because when everyone first becomes an experiencer, the radio begins to control your emotions and exert influence on you. Even if you become stronger in the future, the fear that took root step by step when you were weak is still difficult to eliminate. Dropped. Hills really regrets it now. If I had known earlier. He really should stay away in advance. Because this feeling is really uncomfortable. One hand pinched his chest tightly, and he raised his head and looked up at Sudbai, who was still soaring up to face that big white hand. Only a boom was heard. The two sides collided. The underworld is shaking. The place of enlightenment shakes. There was blood overflowing from Hill's ears. Immediately afterwards, Hill simply closed his spiritual consciousness and cut off all his reactions to the outside world. He wandered back and forth following the corpses like a salted fish. He didn't dare to stay awake at this moment. Because he was really worried about the confrontation between Sudbai and broadcasting aura. It will make you lose confidence in your own way. You should just be a salted fish with peace of mind first. Dream. Non-existent. Terror broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 1078. Big fish eat small fish, and small fish eat shrimps. This is an eternal truth. This truth permeates every aspect of the world. As a fish, it is very difficult for you to resist, because what you resist is your own fate, your own destiny. If you don't want to be a fish, you have to do something else, and you have to squeeze out the position of other creatures, causing a series of reactions. Sudbai feels that he is very happy now. This is a kind of contrasting happiness, because compared with his newborn self, compared to when I was just a kid before, compared to myself who could only dream in a petri dish before, at least now I can preach the truth openly and have a chance to resist. This is undoubtedly a great happiness. It is valuable for people to be satisfied, but it is difficult for people to be satisfied. Boom. Sudbai rushed out of the underworld, like a fish swimming upstream. But the white hand suddenly fell down, trying to hold down this fish that was trying to disobey the rules. This hand is a father's natural advantage in controlling the fate of his children. It is a so-called established ethical method. The three cardinal principles in the three cardinal guidelines and the five constant rules are, the king guides the ministers, the father guides the son, and the husband guides the wife. As parents, Su Yuhang and Lu Menjiao naturally have the ability to control the destiny of their children. Even though the foolish old man moved mountains has always been regarded as a so-called compliment, what the foolish old man said at the beginning, the descendants are endless, is also true. A power that completely deprives future generations of people and binds them to the will of this mind-numbing sport of moving mountains. And radio is the constant link of the audience. Even if the audience goes to another world, their life and death are still controlled by the radio. This is an inescapable fate. Because of this, it was too difficult for Sudbai, the fish, to jump out. But for Sudbai, if he can't jump out this way, it doesn't matter if you don't prove it. Boom. Sudbai's body was scattered and fell directly into the underworld. But the next moment, his body reorganized and he was swimming upstream again. Today, I'll fight you to the death. Boom. 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 That white hand was very much like Suyu Hang's hand. Just like more than 10 years ago, every time Subai wanted to stick his head out of the petri dish, he would reach out and push Subai back. The past scene between father and son reappeared at this time. It's just the same story, but on a different stage. It's like the eldest son of a village competing for family property with his second eldest son, and the crown prince of a royal family competing for the throne with other princes. In essence, what's the difference? Hills has long since closed off his senses and is dangling like a salted fish. To him, this is no less than a fight between gods and the helplessness of mortals. Sudbai's impact caused his body to collapse again and again, but neither Sudbai nor that hand seemed to be tired. Sudbai's body was not the body at its strongest. The reason why he relied on the underworld to achieve enlightenment was because he valued the special nature of the underworld. In this underworld, there were countless corpses of resentful souls. They were the source of the reorganization of his physical body. Ancient zombies refine the gods. This is the real god refining. In the past, Sauron penetrated into Sudbai's body, and Sudbai directly performed the third turn of the ancient zombie. But in fact, it was just a metaphysical god refining, and now, it is the real god refining. The body collapses. It doesn't matter. I place my trust in the underworld. I have countless clones. There is no end to the underworld. I am immortal. In the past, Lao Fugui didn't feel that he was dead, so he could always live. I think, therefore I am, which is the most intuitive expression of refining the gods. Sudbai did not have the natural identity of a son of the plain like Lao Fugui, but this did not prevent him from its a desperate time. It stands to reason that broadcasting hopes that Sudbai will attain enlightenment, because as Sudbai is the descendant of the old rich man and the heir of the current broadcasting consciousness, his potential has actually been recognized for a long time. Once Sudbai attains enlightenment, for broadcasting Zhang has an immediate combat power that is no less than that of Chen Ryu or Li Ji, but Sudbai just wants to prove the truth in this way, which is never allowed by broadcasting. Because once Sudbai succeeds in attaining enlightenment in this way, he will be stepping on broadcasting to ascend to the throne, and broadcasting will lose its control over Sudbai. Even though the radio was now in turmoil by the Qin soldiers in that world, he still did not allow his backyard to catch fire at this time. What's more, with Sudbai's deep hatred for the radio and his parents, if Sudbai was allowed to use it in this way, the success of the sermon is no less than planting a bomb for oneself, but the button to detonate the bomb is not yet in the hands of the broadcaster. It was precisely for this reason that Mr. Zhao and Suyu Hang teamed up to kill the old rich man. What's ridiculous is that Suyu Hang tricked and killed Lao Fugui 20 years ago, but his son has embarked on the same path as Lao Fugui. It's a pity that Suyu Hang can't break away now and hold him accountable again. Boom. There was another collision, and Sudbai's body collapsed again. On both sides, no one is willing to admit defeat, and no one is willing to admit defeat. Everyone knows each other well. No one can afford to lose. And this kind of energy fluctuation in the land of Eastern Righteous Path, its scope of influence is truly unprecedented. Hills didn't know that he was not the only one who was frightened. Even Sudbai, the client, didn't know how big the movement of his own sermon was at this time. Even the previous battles when Boss Liang was so angry at the beauty was far inferior to this time. Radio has always been a transcendent existence. It rarely appears in its true form. Occasionally, its aura is captured by powerful people, which is enough to cause huge panic among listeners. Although some of the broadcasting methods have become a bit deliberate due to Suyu Hang's integration with broadcasting these days, it is far from what it was this time, where it was shown openly and clearly. All listeners around the world who are experienced or above can sense at this time that in one location, the breath of broadcasting is bursting out again and again. Lasting. Continued. And strong. Boss Liang was sitting on the balcony of his home reading the newspaper, but his hands were shaking constantly. He read the masthead for a quarter of an hour without turning the page. Just squat down if you're afraid, Xie Zhen consoled him from the side. He knew that the boss was afraid of that kind of aura, and he was also afraid of it, because every time the broadcast aura broke out, it was tantamount to touching the deepest part of the listener's heart again and again. Sense of fear. But he didn't know that in front of his boss, Xie Chen felt that he needed to be strong, as if the boss was his son, and as a mother, he could not fall. He, that little detective, is preaching, Boss Liang said tremblingly. Yes, Ye Zhen nodded, the battle is indeed scary. No, you don't know, Boss Liang licked his lips and said with lingering fear, I just deliberately tricked him not long ago. Will he come to me after he attains enlightenment? Are you scared? Ji Zhen said with a smile. Their family is all lunatics. Boss Liang took a deep breath, a family of 3, all of them are humming sick. Isn't it good to live peacefully? They have to cause trouble. The next moment, Boss Liang's aura was revealed, forcibly isolating the shocks one after another. Then, Boss Liang threw the newspaper aside and said regretfully, he can't win. He is stepping on the bottom line of broadcasting this time. Do you want him to win or lose? Xie Zhen asked. It would be best for both father and son to die together. Boss Liang rolled his eyes. Now it is estimated that the audience all over the world hates him for not knowing how to advance or retreat. If it had been normal, the killing order might have been issued by now. In the small temple, the monk was watering the tea seedlings, but his hands were shaking a little, and the fat man's soul floated over. Because of the breath coming one after another, the fat man's soul was twisted from time to time, and was pulled for a while. Being compressed for a long time is like looking into a hip-hop mirror, which is very funny. Damn it, monk, I can't hold on any longer. I have to return to my physical body. Is Dabai going to preach or challenge the radio? The fat man looked very surprised. Didn't he say he wanted to imitate the rich and noble style? Is everything going to fall into place? How come there is such a big battle? The monk was unmoved and continued to pour water. It could be seen that the tea seedlings in front of the monk were growing at a speed visible to the naked eye. The Buddha on one side is leaning against the wall with his eyes closed, holding a hatchet. As if asleep. The excitement of terror keeps echoing. It has been a troubled time for the radio and the listeners recently, but at this time, there are more things happening, just like this time. Many people fell into panic and didn't know what was going on. Some people who knew the inside story didn't know how to judge and make choices. Originally, everyone should work together to kill the Qin army in that world and achieve the goal of living a peaceful life for hundreds or even thousands of years. At this time, it became trembling. Yan Huiyong stood on the roof of a building, his eyelids twitching constantly. Many other big guys were also looking in that direction. They should be the group of people with the most complicated moods. No matter what the broadcast is, no matter what the situation is, for all the current listeners, it is everyone's current goal to go to that world and kill all the Qin troops to help the broadcast take over that world. The broadcast has established this goal with a world of exercise stories. But now, some people are still causing trouble, and everyone's rear is not stable. Because some people disdain this kind of goal, and some people are still so willful. In the current environment of the enemy, when everyone is sharpening their knives, Subai's current behavior is nothing more than desperately trying to hold him back. But everyone is helpless. You can't go to the place of enlightenment to kill Subai at this time and terminate the other person's enlightenment, because the attitude of the broadcast is too unclear. But in the midst of the stalemate, the confrontation between the breaths suddenly changed. The third breath appeared instantly. All the big guys who were observing the sermon showed astonishment. Boss Liang stood up with a O sound. Xie Zhen was a little confused at this time. You are trapped in a cocoon, you are trapped in a cocoon. Boss Liang suddenly laughed, you are trapped in a cocoon. I will write another chapter and publish it in the evening. The temperature has dropped sharply recently and the climate is relatively dry. There is a small problem with Long's body, which may slightly affect the update, but the problem is not major. Long will try his best to keep the update stable. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Disyao Long. Chapter 1079. Two cold photos, with an old color and traces of the vicissitudes of time. In these two photos, what is shown is the fate of two souls being divided. This is a cold touch, containing helpless struggle and hysteria. Fate, sealed in dust at this time, is also doomed. But at this time, there was no rehearsal or any communication. Everything seems to have become extremely natural and logical. The fish still flies out of the underworld again and again, but is always slapped down by the giant hand again and again. For the fish, it seems that there is no hope at all, because what this hand contains and represents, it's just too scary and heavy. A few years ago, Subai, who had just become a listener and had just learned about his own life experience, felt that Su Yuhang and Lu Menjiao were walking on a road that no one had traveled before. They were originally pioneers on the same road, but they did not get rid of that tragic feeling. They are more like speculators co-opted by broadcasters. In order to succeed in speculation, they made many arrangements. There is poison, there is division of identity. After various arrangements, Mr. Zhao finally succeeded in getting Mr. Zhao to drink the poisonous wine himself, completing the ideological handover and division. However, they didn't do a very good job of mopping up. If the 500 Qin troops had not appeared, no two great emperors would rise again after more than 2,000 years. Perhaps they can do all the finishing work extremely calmly, and they can leisurely enjoy the pleasure of integrating into the supreme life, and enjoy the ethereal feeling of freely floating consciousness and having everything under control. From a certain point of view, it was Subai's push that allowed the 500 Qin troops to wake up. After all, according to Lao Fugui's character, he didn't care who won or lost. He didn't care. If he cared, the former Su Yuhang would also. The trap couldn't kill him, but because his godson cared, he did something 20 years after his death. It's no wonder that Su Fu's clone would scold Lao Fugui for being unreasonable after figuring out what happened, because for such a character, if he does his job conscientiously, it is not impossible to overturn the broadcast. There is at least a 30% chance that he can do it. Success, at that time, even if the so-called 500 Qin army continued to sleep forever, it would have no effect. But Lao Fugui seemed to be passive and sabotaging his work. He didn't care about his position. If it weren't for the sake of his godson, he might not have done anything. Even if the 500 Qin soldiers had been working as terracotta warriors in that world, it wouldn't have mattered. But now, the old rich man has died long ago, and everything about him has returned to dust. As an old man who has been dead for 20 years, it is obviously impossible for you to expect him to appear again and again to help. Children and grandchildren will have their own blessings. The old rich man fulfilled his responsibility as an elder. He pushed when he could and gave away when he could. He could no longer control the rest. Therefore, many people thought that this sermon was an unreasonable and whimsical adventure. In the end, Subai would end up with a bloody head. The underworld seems to be endless and endless, but the power and figure of the broadcast are much greater than the underworld. To use the boundlessness of underworld to fight against the boundlessness of broadcasting is something that makes people laugh and laugh. Many big guys, including Boss Liang, can tell at a glance that Subai has no hope of winning. There is a son of destiny, but it's not you Subai. Besides, the son of destiny has died willfully early. However, things took a turn for the better. The third breath suddenly appeared. Shocked everyone. This is the sermon. It was originally just a private matter of one person, but Subai forced himself to prove his past and implicated Su Yuhang and the broadcaster. At most, it was a matter between both parties. However, now a third party suddenly appeared. Mutation. That's when it started. Subai in the underworld is still condensing his body again and again, launching impact on that hand again and again. Do not admit defeat. Don't accept your fate. Again and again. Unless the underworld water dries up. Otherwise it never stops. However, under the underworld, there is a new body slowly coming together. He is no longer a boy's body. Because the skeletal structure that was first condensed showed that he had the physique of an adult, the physique of an adult man. Hills, who had been floating around like a salted fish, woke up at this time, because he could no longer pretend to be asleep. It was not because of the appearance of the third breath that he woke up. In fact, even if the fourth breath appeared again, he would wake up. With 5 breaths, Hills also fell asleep without any mistakes. However, he felt that the power in his body was being withdrawn, which made Hills unable to sleep. If he continued to sleep, he would become a human being. Hills started to run away. This game was too humming perverted and he wasn't going to play anymore. The East is too dangerous. He wants to go home. The fish are still doing what the fish should do, and the radio is still doing what the radio should do. And the breath of this third party. But no one can intervene. Unless a big boss suddenly appears and intervenes in this matter at the risk of his own death, this matter is destined to be unstoppable. The breath of Tao is brewing. The energy fluctuations belonging to the big boss are gradually getting stronger as the body under the underworld continues to take shape. Countless resentful souls in the underworld collapsed at this time, turning into the purest soul power and integrating into this body. Countless corpses were drained of their last traces of essence and integrated into this body. Take the entire Huan Quan. Reshape your own body. What a huge undertaking this is. Amazing, surprising. At the same time, it seems that every meridian and bloodline on this body is. They all reveal a very different atmosphere. He is different from the audience of previous sermons. He became independent. Transcended. Hills's face began to look older, and his vitality was still being sucked away. However, because the struggle between the giant hand and the fish was not over, it was difficult for him to get out at this time. Now he finally understood why Subai reminded him to leave first. It's not that Subai is worried that the war between father and son will affect him. But because of the current reason. Hills could only hate herself for being so confident at that time. The bloodlines began to condense again. The shadow of the blood corpse appeared behind the body. Next to the blood corpse, stood a graceful woman. The two of them seemed to be rebuilding the bloodline of the body. Blood blooms like flowers in the underworld. A vampire figure that was tightly locked with chains slowly appeared. This is his blood. It is also the blood of this body. Because the owner of this body has received his inheritance. A gleaming jade seal appeared, carrying the pressure of the national jade seal, but it was a Zibe product. It was just a piece of gold, but at this time, strands of golden liquid dripped down, carving its own traces on the bones of runes. A ball of nether fire was struggling unwillingly, but could not break free. Even after Sauron died, he did not want to be completely swallowed up by the person who killed him, but he could no longer control all this. The next moment, the fire collapsed directly and merged into this body. Flesh, skeleton, soul begin to integrate in all aspects. A shadow, a story. Currently, at this point, just like at the end of a concert, the final rest was drawn and the last long note was drawn out. Subai's body condensed like this. He opened his eyes. The left eye is red, and the right eye is dark and deep. Then, the jade seal of the Dian kingdom floated in front of him. Sudbai reached out and held the jade seal of Dian Kingdom. A huge stone block fell off the rock wall. I, Sudbai, have attained enlightenment today. Bury my past. Boom. The boulder was cut by the blade, transformed into the form of a tombstone. Finally it fell firmly below. Buzz. Sudbai's aura soared into the sky, carrying a kind of unbridled unruliness. This scene shocked all the listeners who paid close attention to the situation here. The power of this aura was almost unparalleled. Moreover, everyone also vaguely felt that this aura seemed not to be restricted by the broadcast. The fish is still struggling, but it is getting weaker and weaker. At the same time, the giant hand is also slapping the fish down again, and it is getting weaker and weaker. Boss Liang sighed and said, I'm trapped in a cocoon. Because the one who first attained enlightenment. It's not Sudbai. The one who struggled at first. It's not Sudbai, either. The seemingly fusion with his past self and with Bai Er is just like a cover. The fish is Bai Er. Bai Er is still struggling, and the cycle repeats itself. He is willing to fall into the cycle. He is laughing wildly. They were supposed to be brothers, but because of their parents' experiments and so-called ambitions, they were made into experimental subjects. Then, their parents successfully cheated broadcasting rules with this experiment. And now, they themselves choose to be guinea pigs again. Purpose? Just to deceive parents who have become broadcasters. It is their parents who have set good examples for them. It is their parents who have created everything for them. All they have to do is a scripted imitation. The fish that Bai Er turned into hindered the broadcaster's will. When the broadcaster determined that Bai Er was Sudbai, then Sudbai, who had truly attained enlightenment, would not exist within the recognition category of the broadcasting rules. Everything has already been scripted. It's just that last time the two actors were puppets, this time they showed their true colors. Dad, Mom, I'm down below, waiting for you. The fish was still rolling, and the giant hand fell down again and again. And as Sudbai's tombstone finally fell to the bottom of the underworld. Everything. It was calm in an instant. I said I want to prove the past, present, and future. But as long as I bear witness to the past and bury my past. So. My present. And my future. It's all in my hands. Sudbai raised his head and looked at the sky above. Until now. You are the real one. Become free. On a hillside outside the small temple, next to the tomb of the old rich man, Ruyi was prostrate there. In a trance. Ruyi seemed to see a middle-aged man with a bloated look and greasy hair standing next to the tombstone. This is a figure that makes it familiar and friendly. The man seemed to be feeling regretful and happy at the same time. At last. Only a long sigh was left. A white-haired person gives a black-haired person a gift. Terror broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 1080. Hills looked a bit old. He was lying tremblingly beside the underworld, like a waning old man, with wrinkled skin, gray hair, and age spots all over his face. He struggled to sit up, raised his head, and looked at Sudbai, who was walking towards him step by step. The contrast between the current self and the current Sudbai could not be clearer. A high-spirited man who had just achieved enlightenment, broke his destiny, and even completed his transcendence from broadcasting. One almost became a human crumbling. For Hills, who likes face, especially in front of Sudbai, this is really a hard thing to accept. After all, when the two parties first met, in the Western Enlightenment land, he faced Sudbai as half a big brother or half a master. In the view of Hills at that time, Sudbai was a brother Cao, who has no grasp of the control and use of power, has a strong psychological advantage. But slowly, Hills discovered that Sudbai was surpassing him with amazing Sudbai. The two had a fight here before. Hills lost, but Hills thought it was an accident. But next, one thing after another, proud people like Hills had to admit that Subai was indeed ahead of him. He even had the same feeling as the audience of Lychee's era when they looked at Lychee's back. Bitter. Too bitter. Subai knelt down in front of Hills and looked at Hills without saying anything. Hills waved his hand and dodged a little. Don't look at it, it's ugly. The implication is that I don't want my old appearance to appear in your sight. I hope that in your memory, I will always be so young and beautiful. You are already like this, and you are still disgusting. A smile appeared on Subai's lips. Hills shrugged, looked at his wrinkled skin like willow bark, and said helplessly, "You have already attained enlightenment, yet you are still looking for a sense of presence in front of these poor people." Subai raised his hand. All the tombstones under the underworld collapsed one after another at this time. Immediately afterwards, wisp after strand of origin was captured by Subai, integrated into Hill's body. Hill's skin began to become plump again, and the breath on his body began to slowly recover. "I'm done, come on." Subai said this sentence in English. Hills was stunned for a moment. Some said angrily, "You destroyed my sense of anticipation and sacredness about my upcoming enlightenment, you abominable sexually indifferent patient. In a foreign country, there are many disturbances, but you can find your own tranquility. Leaving the circle you were originally familiar with and being alone, you may feel lonely, but you also have a sense of security that you hide yourself. Just like when I was a child, I hid under the quilt after turning out the lights. Today's class is over, a little tired, but feeling very fulfilled." Ying Yinger is wearing a very conservative red down jacket, with her shawl long hair falling naturally, which is another kind of style of hers. Just like whether a handsome guy is really handsome or fake, you can often get the truest answer if you ask him to shave his head and look at it. If a woman doesn't wear makeup but still gives people a special feeling, it means that this woman may really be naturally beautiful. At the corner coffee shop, Ying Yinger chose a seat and sat down. She ordered a cup of coffee according to her past habits. There was still a lot of copywriting to read today. Any work and study will often turn into boring repetition. But Ying Yinger enjoyed it. "Hi, hello, can I sit in front of you?" A blond man came over. He was dressed calmly but fashionably. Whether it was his eyes or other subtle movements, he showed that kind of personality. Confidence. Confidence in women. This is a veteran in the romance field. Ying Yinger is good at observing others. Perhaps this is her professional habit. She didn't answer because she was too lazy to answer. Maybe it would be a good experience to have a romantic relationship or a free and easy emotional entanglement in a foreign country that both parties knew well, but Ying Yinger didn't think she needed to do that. The man looked a little embarrassed, but sat down anyway. "Are you alone? Come to school." Ying Yinger still didn't answer and continued to look at the copywriting materials in front of her. The man seemed a little embarrassed. Maybe he didn't feel it so clearly when he was watching from a distance before, but after getting close to this woman, he felt like there was a feeling of needles all over his body. It was like all his disguises disappeared in front of this woman, and everything about him was seen through by this woman, which even gave him the idea of running away. But he didn't do that. He felt that this was a challenge of his own. Ying Yinger put away the copywriting and things. She knew that this man would not give up, so she had no choice but to leave. Seeing Ying Yinger about to leave, the man wanted to stand up and stop her, but in the end he didn't get up. Returning to her rented apartment, a relatively high-end community, Ying Yinger's life could not be considered luxurious, but it was enough to be called petty bourgeoisie. She was not short of money, no matter when she opened a clinic in Subai's place. The money she earned was still the property she already owned, which was enough for her to live a wealthy and relaxed life. She will not make things difficult for herself in life. This is something she learned from that man. She never contacted that man again, just as that man never contacted her again. She could know that that man was extraordinary, and she even once fell into that man's unique charm. But not everything will fall into the rhythm of beginning and end. This is not fate, just coincidence. Ying took a bath, which washed away today's fatigue. There are still many things waiting for her tomorrow. She needs to make herself fulfilled and busy, and she needs to stop herself from having too much time to think. That person. She knew that she was slowly changing. She couldn't say whether she liked or accepted the current changes. It might be a bit pretentious, but she did feel like a fish out of water, losing all hope for life. That passion and anticipation. Sometimes, she also thought about what would happen if the man really wanted her those few times. What awaited her would be a first love that she would remember for a lifetime or a nightmare that she would regret. Unfortunately, the man seemed to have a big problem in that area. At this thought, Ying smiled, because he knew that the man's problem was not physical, because he had touched the other person's hardness several times, but the other person seemed to be restraining himself. Just like the ancient nobility and royal family, they have an extremely noble understanding and cherishment of their own bloodline and are unwilling to let their bloodline be exposed. Yes. That was the feeling that man gave her. She is a woman, an ordinary woman, at least for now. Therefore, Ying does not know the turmoil in the other circle, and she will not think about where the future of the two worlds will go. In her opinion, the temperature tonight is a bit cold, and she needs to change her clothes at night. Pajamas are the immediate priority. There are many people who think that life should be wonderful, but in fact, life is just a piece of crap. After changing into pajamas, Ying lay on the bed and picked up a book. She felt that this shouldn't be her style, lying on the bed, turning on the desk lamp, and reading a book. She had never had this habit before, but this method was suitable for killing the last bit of energy before going to bed. The phone rang at this moment. It was a call from her former assistant. After she went to the United States for further study, this assistant opened a psychological consulting room and the business was pretty good. "Sister, haven't you slept yet?" "No," Ying replied. "Let me tell you something. The house where we originally stored our equipment is now facing demolition. I know about this, just help me handle it, and you can pay the money to my account. It's the equipment in there, sister, are you still planning on it?" Ying was slightly in a trance. Those instruments reminded her of that man. When she tightened his neck with a rope, when she stimulated his body with an electric shock stick, when she felt the temperature of his chest. It seems that the scenes from the past are slowly emerging. He is not afraid of death, and deep down in his heart, there should be a devil, a charming devil, a devil that makes him sink. "Sister. Any more? Stay and help me find a place to settle down." "Okay, sister, I will take care of it. Can you come back? I still like to do things with you. My class is not over yet, you should do your best first." "Well, I'll wait for you to come back." After hanging up the phone, Ying threw the book aside. She got out of bed. I opened the innermost layer of the closet, and there was a small package there. These were the clothes I brought specially. When you open the package, the clothes inside are completely opposite to the other conservative styles in your wardrobe. She put on black stockings and a sexy long skirt. She looked at herself in the mirror. "I have never worn clothes like this since I came to the United States." The image of myself in the mirror suddenly seemed strange. Very cold. It's really cold. She wrapped her arms around herself subconsciously. Doctors don't treat themselves. She felt that there was something wrong with her psychology, but she just wanted to let it go. She picked up her phone and couldn't help but shudder. She opened WeChat, found the familiar title, and sent a message. "It's been a long time since you came to therapy." She didn't expect his reply, because he seemed to have disappeared from the world and could not be traced. But after 3 seconds, the phone vibrated. The other party actually replied. Just one simple word. Good. Terror broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 1081. There were no flowers, no salutes, and no welcoming primary school students sending flowers. When Subai and Hills walked out of the place of sermon, they looked very low-key, which could even be described as deserted. There was only one tombstone left in the entire place of enlightenment, and that was Sudbai's own tombstone. The rest of the tombstones were all crushed and sent into Hill's body. Hills was still very satisfied with this. Of course, comparing people to each other is really irritating. Looking at the man in front of him, Hills really felt that there was no joy in his success in attaining enlightenment. Although they were both enlightened, Subai had already completed a certain level of enlightenment. His detachment, and himself, is nothing more than making his role in this game bigger. Therefore, when Subai invited Hill to go back to the small temple to rest, Hill refused directly. Limited life, especially when she has to go to that world to face a greater test in the near future. Hills hopes that she can be as happy as possible during this time, instead of becoming a jealous and resentful woman. Hills left, and Subai returned to the small temple alone. The mountain flowers in the small temple are blooming, and the monks are frying tea. The fragrant and rich tea fragrance fills the air, refreshing the heart and mind. Sometimes, a group can lack anyone, but it cannot lack people who are interested in life and can cook. For a long time, monks have played the role of both father and mother in this group. Subai sat down on a chair in the yard. Fatty was floating around Subai, his long hair fluttering, as if he was playing with the tune of a Chinese ghost story. Of course, according to Fatty himself, it was because of those ancestors. He doesn't have any short hairstyle, he just wants to make himself more dramatic. Buddha still did the same thing every day according to his schedule, but today he deliberately postponed his evening classes, came to the edge of the yard, and sat down with Subai. The two of them didn't talk much, and topics like what's the weather like obviously didn't apply to these two men. The monk took out the tea set and started making tea. The fat man still didn't get his physical body back, and his soul body was still floating around. He seemed to particularly like this feeling of freedom. Suner did not participate in this party. She was in seclusion. Of course, it may be a kind of escape she chose. At this time, it was inappropriate for her to participate in this party. Some people, when she is not around, the relationship between them becomes more and more flavorful like old wine stored in a cellar, while some people, even if they are close in front of her, become more and more like boiled water, not to mention estrangement, but that the meaning of forgetting each other in the world is becoming more and more obvious. The monk's tea was brewed, and each person had a cup. The fat man directly absorbed the fragrance of the tea, a bit like a ghost returning home to enjoy the sacrifice. Subai took a sip of tea. To be honest, the tea was very ordinary, much inferior to the tea that the monk had brewed before. Young Master Su was not a person who didn't know how to taste. Unlike Fatty, no matter how good the tea was, it was served cold. Drink. It is impossible for the monk's tea-making skills to deteriorate, so the problem is probably with this tea. This tea. Not good. Buddha frowned slightly, obviously something was wrong. The monk continued to drink naturally, then put down the teacup and said, Tea is like life. If it has not experienced the precipitation of time, it will not have that much flavor. If someone takes a photo of us at this time, it can be used as a composition topic for students. The fat man spoke first with a smile. This time, the fat man cut off the monk's chicken soup in advance. The monk was stunned for a moment and shook his head. If the tea doesn't taste good, don't force it. Fatty. Everyone put down their teacups. Subai looked at the monk. He didn't think anything was wrong before, but now it seems that the monk is indeed much weaker, and this weakness is continuing. Is there something wrong with your body? Subai asked. The monk shook his head. No problem. Buddha said, you are still stingy. The garden is full of blooming mountain flowers, which are all nurtured by the monk's own vitality. It's a bit like when old Fugui walked all the way and wildflowers bloomed all the way. Lord Buddha said that the monk was stingy, which meant that the monk didn't add too much vitality to the tea tree. This tea tasted like steamed buns made with human blood. The little guy was brought out by Jixiang. When Subai came back, he was taking a nap. At this moment, he climbed on Subai's body and hugged his father without letting go. However, his little nose was still smelling, as if he had discovered that something happened to his father. What a change, something different. A spiritual boy is a spiritual boy. Although he grows slowly in this world, his spiritual sense is still there. Do you feel isolated? Buddha suddenly asked at this time. What? Subai couldn't understand. Of course, this was just an attitude. Beyond the world, Buddha asked, but we are still in the five elements. It's just that I have temporarily escaped the control of the radio. Moreover, I am in front of you now, and the radio can still see me. Then why don't you go into seclusion? The fat man suddenly asked at this time. Hide well and wait until the broadcast thing is over. Damn it, no one can stop you even if you want to be Jesus. Impossible. The monk shook his head at this time and said, the rules of broadcasting will not change. Even if it fails to enter that world, it will never allow the world it has colonized to have another wave. If Subai blindly hides, and if we are not planning to go to that world, it is very likely that the final outcome will be that before we go to that world, the radio will ask us to deal with Subai first. Subai nodded, obviously agreeing with the monk's statement. But no matter what, it's much better than us. At least you can breathe some free air. Fatty still envied Subai now. When you don't want to enter the story world, you can stay in it. How wonderful it is. In the end, I will also get on the train with you. Subai looked very calm when he said this. He had no intention of struggling not to get on the train. He knew that Lychee was waiting for her in that world, and he still had a very important thing was not finished, so he didn't plan to dwell or struggle on this matter. In the previous story world, he had actually thought it through. After the tea party, Subai returned to the bedroom with the little guy in his arms. The little guy was playing with toys. Jixiang was watching from the side, while Subai was lying on the bed, watching the TV in front of him. Sometimes, people are really strange. When you are ordinary, you want to fight to change this ordinary, but those who are often extraordinary will keep yearning for this ordinary. Perhaps it's due to different realms or different mentality. The sour-smelling moans always seem to hit some people's G-spots more. Looking at his palms, it was as if the scene of the enlightenment was still in front of him. The road was destined to get narrower and narrower. Subai didn't know how certain Li Ji's plan was. He didn't even know whether Li Ji was still living in that world. But maybe what the monk said before is right, that is, if you don't have your parents, you may not even have the meaning to survive. In ancient mythology, Agar would split a mountain to save her mother, but in her case, she went through all kinds of troubles to find her parents and then killed them. The process is the same. There was a knock on the door outside. Sunar came in with some fruits and fed them to the little guy himself. However, the little guy only took a few bites and stopped eating. Subai could tell that the little guy's attitude towards Sunar had always been, perhaps it was because Sunar thought he was Subai's illegitimate son when he first met him, and the soul boy felt Sunar's hostility towards him when they first met. But the crux of the problem may not be here. After all, the fat man once stole the little guy's task, but now the relationship between the two is the best. You should eat something too, I'm going to rest. Sunar just left the room. There is not much communication between them. Subai didn't feel anything. After all, Nothing really happened between the two parties. Doo-doo, doo-doo. The little guy was lying on the bedside with something shaking in his hand. Subai turned his head and looked at it, and found that the toys the fat man bought for the little guy were really diverse. There were even props of a certain cartoon character. Take the small black plastic whip. The little guy was waving it excitedly, and then he looked at Subai. Subai's eyes sank slightly. The little guy immediately realized that this game did not seem to please his father, so he quickly threw away the plastic whip and continued playing with his building blocks. Ji Xiang on the side is still indifferent. Yes, it is already a fantasy for you to ask a cat to take care of a child's daily life. It is even more incredible for you to ask a cat to educate the child's moral, intellectual, physical, artistic, and physical development. Subai got out of bed, squatted down in front of the little guy, stretched out his hand and pinched the little guy's seemingly fragile face, and said, "What do you remember in this little bag of melons?" Of course, this was also Subai's own fault. He was not a good father at the time, but he actually took the little one with him when he first met Yingying as a child. The bitter pill of the upper beam being crooked and the lower beam being crooked was finally reaped by Subai. When he thought of Yingying, Subai suddenly felt that he missed her a little. In the past, in Shanghai, every time he was in a bad mood or bored, he liked to talk to Yingying. Seeing that the person who understands the thoughts of men best and knows how to please you, it is indeed a pleasure for a woman to be so charming in front of you. At this moment, Subai's cell phone rang. I took it out and looked at it, and it turned out to be a WeChat message from Yingying. It's been a long time since you came to therapy. Subai smiled. Maybe he had too many worries and constraints before, but now that he is semi-free, he can indeed be a little more willful and casual. Good. Subai only replied with one word. There was no need to ask the other person where he was, if he had time, when it was convenient, etc. There was no need before and there would be no need in the future. At this moment, Subai suddenly turned around and saw that Fatty's soul had floated into his house at some point. He had blocked all spiritual consciousness in the small temple, otherwise he, a big boss, would be here, Buddha, monk and Fatty. As well as Sunar and the others, they would be under pressure from the big boss all the time. Therefore, Subai did not notice the fat man's entry in advance. The fat man's soul came close to Subai's screen, as if he was peeking at Subai's chat history. Then a face. Turning red from holding back. Very hard. Very aggrieved too. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 1082. Damn it, you really want to be full and warm. Oh my god, are you ready to do some exercise just after you became enlightened and gained some freedom? Anyway, the two-child policy has just been opened, and you still have a place. The fat man seemed to have transformed into the god of Bagua at this time. His soul was swollen very much, as if he had been severely stimulated. This made Subai a little strange. Logically speaking, a fat man shouldn't be like this. This guy usually eats secretly and wanders around, so he won't be so hungry and thirsty. Well. The fat man sighed. Fat master, I am transcendent. What do you mean? Subai took out a cigarette, walked out of the room and came to the living room, and the fat man followed him. It seems that the soul has been out playing for too long, and the soul is particularly sensitive to everything in its state. After I became familiar with this sensitivity, I found that after I returned to my original body, those things could not stimulate me to stand up. Don't lift anymore, Subai couldn't help but chuckle. As I get older, my body is exhausted by tobacco and alcohol, and finally I don't control myself. It's normal for this kind of problem to occur. Subai now finally understood why Fatty felt so aggrieved when he looked at the screen of his phone just now. There was a problem with his physical body and his functions were suspended. However, his good brother started to shake WeChat, which was just adding salt to the wound. No wonder the fat man was too lazy to return to his physical body and kept his soul floating around all day long. What should I do, Dabai? You don't know this feeling. The excitement of the soul is really strong, just like you were dancing naked in the North Pole in the winter. The fat man looked sad. I tried to return to my physical body halfway through, and then went to the county town to find a bathroom. The result, damn it, that anti-technician looked at me with full sympathy. I sympathize with you too, Subai said after finishing the attack. Fart, you are ready to date P as soon as you are free. I remember whether she is in the United States or the United Kingdom, right? It seems that you can call her back with just a WeChat message. How horny are you? Is the usual cold and cool style of sex just an act? The fat man began to hit his companions, obviously to vent his inhumane grief and anger during this period. I have a way to treat your situation, Subai said. What? The fat man immediately became energetic. Speak quickly, tell me quickly. Damn, I have always been embarrassed to ask the monk this question. If you have a way, please tell me quickly. Haven't you played too much with the soul, so the stimulation of the physical body has weakened? Just find something that can stimulate you. What can excite me? The fat man asked like a curious baby. Then Subai looked at him. Talk. Subai said nothing and continued to look at the fat man. That's right, the fat man urged. Subai still looked at the fat man without saying anything. Then the fat man seemed to finally understand. Damn it, fatty, you've been in such a miserable state and you still hinted at me about that. Can we still be friends? Look at my soul storm. I didn't say anything, Subai shrugged. But the fat man was already in a state of rage at this time, and directly bumped into Subai with his soul. Next moment, a fat red meteor flew out from the small temple. The fat man was thrown directly off the mountain. A look of sadness and anger. He forgot. This guy has already proven his truth. I can't do it myself. In the past, environmental problems such as mild winters and global warming have continued to ferment for more than 10 years, but this winter seems to be particularly severe. Chengdu's winters are not that cold on weekdays, but now, a biting chill has begun to fill the air. Just after getting off the plane, Ying ordered a cup of coffee and sat there in the airport cafe. She didn't know why she was so impulsive and came directly to Chengdu. She didn't even contact the man in advance. She knew he was in Sichuan just because of the geographical notification. On the plane, Ying was also thinking about how she was doing this. She didn't think she was an amorous woman. In fact, she had never really been in love until now, not even her first love. Once, she took the initiative to tell him that she would give him her first time, but he remained indifferent in the end. It was just a good reply, and he directly booked a flight back to China for the next day and came to Chengdu. This kind of behavior is infinitely close to those girls who meet netizens thousands of miles away. She didn't know what he would think of her, but it seemed like she didn't need to think about it. She knew that she had some psychological problems. She really had no resistance to that man, and she didn't even care how frivolous she looked in his eyes. Of course, she needs to adjust her mentality, and she must also greet her appearance with the most elegant and considerate face. She believes that he will come to pick her up, just like she didn't know how he came to pick her up every time he came to her before. Even though he came, I don't know how he left. Own. Sink. However, after sitting for half an hour, the figure she was waiting for still did not appear, which made Ying a little disappointed. It seemed that a trip that just left should come to an end at this time. She didn't plan to go find her. Although she had flown to Chengdu, this seemed to be enough. After all, She was still a little proud and reserved in her heart and couldn't let herself completely let go. She was hesitating and hesitant. That mysterious and addictive man. This time. It seems that I will still be disappointed. Yang Yinger even had some doubts about what she liked about him. Was it the hard-to-get attitude every time or the disappointment of being left out again and again? The latter seems more like a manifestation of his own masochistic tendencies. The coffee was already cold. Yang Yinger turned her head slightly and stood up. She didn't know where she should go, so she planned to book a hotel near the airport and maybe return to Shanghai tomorrow. She was like a naughty child who secretly took money from her parents, but was extremely frightened and uneasy. She didn't like this feeling, because it would make her lose the calmness she used to have in front of him. She thought that the adjective little dear crashing didn't suit her. She knew clearly that if she became a simple fool, maybe, it lost all its remaining appeal in his eyes. This is not love, but a game. Perhaps. During treatment, he is right in front of him, letting himself do what he wants. But in the real relationship between the two, he began to gradually become the real master. After booking a hotel, Yang Yinger pulled her suitcase and left. The hotel was just outside Shuangliu Airport, and she could get there quickly by taking a taxi. Entering the hotel and walking into the elevator, Yang Yinger looked at herself in the elevator mirror. She was still young, so she didn't need to worry about whether she was getting old, but she could see that there was a hint of hesitation and uneasiness in her eyes. After all, he is not a god, and he cannot calculate everything. Perhaps, he would be surprised when he knew that he flew directly to Chengdu because of a one-word reply, and then felt that he was crazy. Or, like before, after making love with myself, I would not go too far and then buy myself a plane ticket to send myself away. Being separated may be the best portrayal of the relationship between the two of them. She is willing to show her beauty in front of him, and is willing to adapt to his psychology and senses. She can feel his enjoyment, and for her, pleasing him is as if you can also get a great sense of satisfaction. It's like a romantic relationship. It seems that once you get to that point and become his mistress, it won't be that interesting. I am a woman, and women are ultimately products of impulse and complexity. She doesn't want to use her professional eyes to see herself now. I don't want to analyze my own mentality. She didn't want her heart to be completely exposed. Sometimes, some confusion and thinking seem to be the most suitable emotions now. Once you look at everything, it means nothing. Yang Yinger decided to book a flight back to Shanghai tomorrow. The relationship between her and him was shallower than a romantic relationship, so it was better for each of them to keep a good memory. The elevator reached the floor and opened. Yang Yinger hesitated for a while before walking out just as the elevator door was about to close. The carpeted aisle made her feel a little cold. This was a natural reaction after a person's impulsive emotions. Now that she has calmed down, she feels that she should not pursue this so-called romance. Life is not only about poetry and distance, but the first thing to leave is the present. Take out the room card, swipe the door and push it open. Yang Yinger took off her high heels and walked on the carpet with only thin stockings on her feet. She came to the bedside and lay down gently, with a touch of her own laziness. There was nothing else in the suitcase, only a few sets of sexy clothes that he carefully selected. He seemed to like stockings, so he picked a few more sets to bring with him, in various colors. He liked to wear them in front of him. But now it seems that it is no longer needed. Yang Yinger felt that she was ridiculous. She was looking forward to a tacit understanding, and longed to see him waiting for her when she got off the plane. Even if there was no tacit understanding, with his mystery, she should be able to go on this unpromised date. Perhaps, I thought too simply and too beautifully. Life. Not a fairy tale. At this moment, Yang Yinger suddenly realized that there was the sound of water in the bathroom of her room. She had not noticed it before because she was in a trance. She stood up suddenly, like a frightened lamb. And at this time, Subai, who had just taken a bath, walked out wrapped in a bath towel. Her delicate muscles and bronzed skin looked so alluring. Ying went from one surprise to another, feeling like she was on a roller coaster. Subai shook the dew from his hair, picked up a bottle of mineral water on the counter, and took a sip. He said to Ying who was still lying on the bed, "I've washed it, you go and wash it." Terror broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 1083. Chen Guang was sitting in the private room of the hot pot restaurant. The dishes had been arranged and the hot pot base had been boiled, but the person he was waiting for had not arrived yet. At noon, Chen Guang had already called Subai. At that time, Subai said that he was watching a movie with his friends and asked Chen Guang to wait. Chen Guang said yes. However, the wait lasted from 12 noon to 12 p.m. for 12 hours. Chen Guang was sitting here. He was still wearing a middle school uniform, looking very ordinary. The boss planned to close the business, but was directly hypnotized by Chen Guang and told them to get off work and leave on their own. If Subai hadn't already attained enlightenment and Chen Guang could no longer sense the aura, Chen Guang would have had the urge to find Subai directly in Chengdu. Do you watch movies? Which movie lasts 12 hours? Fortunately, Chen Guang's energy-raising skills were good, and he could still sit still. Of course, this is impressive. If it were Subai in the past, he wouldn't have the face to let him wait like this. But now that he is a big boss, and the most special one, he can show off to himself, and he is really there is no reason to argue. Chen Guang took matters into his own hands, changed the hot pot base, and cut some fresh dishes from the kitchen to put on the table. He was still waiting. Fortunately, just after 12 o'clock, Subai finally walked into this hot pot restaurant. Next to Subai, there was a young woman wearing a black slim-down jacket. Chen Guang's first glance fell on that woman because he couldn't sense any aura from Subai. However, the same was true for this woman. There are two possibilities. One is that these two people are big bosses, so I can't see through it. The other possibility is that the woman next to Subai is just an ordinary person. Subai sat down, and Ying sat next to him. Chen Guang noticed that the woman's face was slightly red, her posture revealed a kind of laziness, and there was a special aura moisturizing and warming her body. He understood most of it at the moment, but he still joked. Did you go to the movie theater to watch all the Pirates of the Caribbean movies? If I hadn't made an appointment with you, I think I could review the Star Wars series again. Subai picked up the chopsticks, picked up a piece of beef and put it into the pot. Hello, Ying greeted Chen Guang. She didn't know what to call this young man dressed as a middle school student, nor could she figure out the relationship between him and Subai. Hello, Chen Guang also replied. Chen Guang knew in his heart that if it was just a romantic relationship, there was no need for Subai to bring this woman to his party. What do you want from me? Subai asked. My sister sent me a message, Chen Guang said calmly. Subai was slightly startled. Lychee. Ying looked as usual. She didn't care about Subai's relationship with other women. She didn't care about it. As she said before, she would not ask Subai to take any responsibility for herself. Is it your turn? Subai smiled and put the beef into the dipping dish. The implication is that the original Hai Mai was killed by himself and became a victim of Li Ji's use. Now, Chen Guang has taken on Gong Zihai's job again. This is not a good job, because of Li Ji's personality. She can treat you like a spring breeze, but after using you, she can ruthlessly discard you without even looking at you. Subai even thought that if Su Yuhang and Lu Menjiu hadn't been one step ahead, it was very likely that Lizzie would have chosen Su Yuhang's path in the end. A ruthless woman and a terrible woman. The children who had cuddled up to her in the orphanage and called her eldest sister since childhood first became Su Yuhang's first batch of experimental subjects, and then they were tricked again by Lizzie. Subai never regretted killing Haimai. In his view, Haimai was just a tool. In fact, in the end, Haimai had already collapsed when he discovered the truth, and his personality had already been destroyed. Died. How should I put it, the situation is not very good now. Chen Guang took a sip of juice, she is seriously injured. I can guess this. Subai didn't feel surprised at all. The Qin army's awakening was not just a game of play. The broadcast could not even complete the retreat, which is enough to show how crazy the Qin army was. Li Qi is still alive now, which is already considered very powerful. Are you really not interested in her anymore? Chen Guang asked, because he felt that Subai didn't seem to be very enthusiastic about this matter. On the contrary, I am very interested in her because her goals and mine are the same. Subai shook his head, but as long as I know that she is not dead, that is enough. As long as she doesn't die, her identity as a poisoner will be useful. This is Subai's only consideration. I have already used it here, and although Li Qi's side is a semi-finished product, haha, are Su Yuhang, Lu Menjiao and the others not monks halfway? Can he be considered a real master Zhao? Everyone is half a bucket full of water, just the right match. At this time, the classic line from The Wind and Cloud actually appeared in Subai's mind. Success and failure are also wind and cloud. He and Li Qi were the stepping stones for Su Yuhang and his wife to step on. Now, these two stones were planning to make them fall to death. My sister also said that she is waiting for you. Chen Guang shrugged. That's all. Okay, Subai nodded, indicating that he understood, then turned his head and looked at Yingying. Are you afraid of the spicy food? Eatable. Subai ate this meal very easily, and Chen Guang also ate very easily, but the dining table was a little deserted. Fortunately, the three of them were not afraid of being deserted, so they felt more at ease. After the meal, Chen Guang left first. He asked Subai this time just to convey the news that Li Ji sent back from that world, not to ask Subai for anything. In fact, Chen Guang himself had hesitated about whether to convey the news. He struggled because he had witnessed with his own eyes the scene of Jamie May collapsing in front of him. But in the end, Chen Guang still chose to obey. Perhaps it was for this reason that Haimai May became her puppet step by step under Lizzie's guidance, right? Some things, you just don't have a choice. Subai and Yingying walked side by side on the small street. It was quiet at night, so it was more suitable for a walk. The weather was not very good tonight, so the stars were not visible and it was a bit cold. Subai was fine. Yingying put her hands in her pockets, lowered her head slightly, and followed Subai's footsteps. I will go back to Shanghai tomorrow, and then back to the United States to continue my courses, Yingying said. Are you in such a hurry? Subai smiled. You can't bear to leave me. Yingying looked at Subai. This man only walked slowly with a cigarette in his hand. He didn't hug her or keep herself warm. He was really cute and selfish, as if he didn't care about the feelings of the people around him. A bit. Subai nodded. I didn't think I had any sexual indifference before. You were the first to say it, and then, I don't know what happened, but all my friends around me also knew it. You're not a monk. Normal people don't abstain from sexual desires. Yingying seemed very natural. Then are you planning to put this blame on me? You put the pot on, and you take it down too. Subai, you know, no matter how irresponsible or scumbag in this world who likes to play with women, they can't say the shameless words you just said. I still feel a little pain down there. Yingying stretched out her foot and kicked Subai gently. At this time, a muscular man who was running at night passed by the two of them. He was only wearing a short-sleeved shirt, dripping with sweat and full of masculine spirit. On the other hand, Subai here seemed a little more refined. Although if he took off his clothes, Subai's muscles and bones were definitely the most unique design. Are you interested in that kind of man? Subai lowered his head and asked. I don't know, Ying shook her head. I'm not bad either, Subai continued. There's no way to compare. You're the only sample. Hee. Subai smiled again, maybe he was really relaxed today. A person's life is usually wasted. When things happen, he is nervous and frightened. When there is no way out, he is calm. Subai now belongs to the latter type. Because I know what I am going to do, and have already decided, I look much more free and easy. Of course, I am more authentic when I act like a scumbag. Sit down, you are tired today, Subai pointed to a pavilion and said. Shouldn't it be you who should be tired? Ying asked. You are feeling comfortable, Subai sat down by the pavilion. Ying did not keep her distance this time. She sat down next to Subai and leaned on him. I'll probably have to leave in a while, Subai looked at the woman beside him. This was the first woman he had seen since becoming an audience member, and perhaps, it would also be his last woman. I know, Ying seemed very calm, and there was no sadness of separation between the two of them, otherwise you wouldn't touch me. I'm a little embarrassed by what you said, Subai stretched out his hand and touched the tip of his nose. I don't have much money to leave you. In fact, I was quite rich before, but I lost my family property on purpose inexplicably. Now I feel it's a bit of a pity, but I had no other choice at the time. 12 hours, the memory you left on me is profound enough. Can this be considered an advantage? Subai smiled brightly. I have to leave a romantic impression on you, otherwise it would be too young to just leave you with that scene to remember me. How romantic, Ying looked at Subai. Flowers, fireworks, or a sea of candles. How about giving you a piece of star? Subai asked. I don't think you can say such things to coax girls, but you ask me today. Ying was stunned before she finished speaking. She saw Subai waving to the sky. Next moment, the dark clouds overhead dissipated. The stars bloom. Even the crescent moon casts a charming halo tonight. 2 drops of essence and blood dripped from Subai's fingertips. They were obtained from the monk when he came to Chengdu from the small temple. The essence and blood dripped down. Immediately, the flowers and trees outside the pavilion were in full bloom and the grass was green. The moonlight is hazy, the flowers are dancing brilliantly. I can't give you forever. But I also want you to remember the beauty of this moment. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 1084. If you love her, give her 12 hours and the most beautiful stars. The fat man floated around alone in the courtyard of the small temple, like a fat and worried ghost, with a wave of sadness, which affected the warm atmosphere originally created by the monks in the courtyard. After all, the fat man, his soul is already very powerful, and now it seems that there is a trend of developing into a resentful soul. This change is likely to be the Ghost King level. Of course, the monk and Buddha are not worried about this. If the fat man can really play himself into a Ghost King, then the fat man can just find a piece of tofu and kill himself. However, the soul has a greater impact on the radiation of the surrounding environment. Once the fat man is in a mood, the surrounding environment will respond accordingly. In the morning, the monk came to the yard to water the flowers as usual. He looked at the fat man in the yard and said with a smile, "Amitabha, why are you so angry?" The fat man floated in front of the monk, twisted his face, and said, "It's hard to describe. It's like 2 people are very thirsty and don't have any water to drink. Then your friend suddenly found water and drank 1 glass and poured another glass. It was extravagant and wasteful, but I can watch helplessly from the side. Didn't you secretly follow Dabai to Chengdu yesterday?" The monk was stunned for a moment, then seemed to understand something and said, "It turns out that he was stimulated." "Damn it, monk, I didn't tell you bad things about Dabai. Did this guy ask you for 2 drops of blood before he left?" the fat man asked. "Yeah," the monk nodded. He used it to pick up girls and threw it on the ground. He didn't even have to spend any money to buy it. It's really like picking up a chick. It feels like inviting a girl to eat spicy hot pot. It doesn't matter, as long as he is happy with it, he really needs to be happy. The monk did not say anything, that is, since Subai has suffered so much and endured so much torture, he can indeed choose to be happy. As for the use of those 2 drops of essence and blood, the monk didn't care. They came all the way from the United States to find him, but you know what happened? He didn't even pay for the apartment. The girl paid for it. After the girl rented the apartment, he went straight into the room to take a shower. The fat man beat his chest and stamped his feet, feeling completely unbalanced. It's a pity that the female psychiatrist doesn't have any sisters anymore. Logically speaking, you shouldn't be so resentful. The monk looked at the fat man and continued to water the flowers. The most important thing is that they stayed in the bedroom for 12 hours. Do you know what this means? The fat man became more and more angry as he thought about it. And they actually blocked me out. They were friendly with me before. But when I was doing business, I was directly isolated from a 10-mile radius, and I couldn't break through his aura and restrictions, which was so annoying. Are you afraid of being beaten? The monk didn't believe that the barrier Subai randomly arranged could stop Fatty, but Fatty himself didn't dare to go too far, for fear of irritating Subai and getting beaten up. Before that incident, a man was a beast, irrational, but after that incident he became a saint, with no desires or desires. The monk has never experienced anything between men and women, but he is a well-trained human being and knows everything he needs to know. The woman's breath was still flowing when she came out. One look at it and it was clear that Dabai was afraid that she would be in pain and couldn't bear it, so he used his own power to nourish her body while staying here for 12 hours. The fat man spat viciously on the ground. Spit, of course there was no saliva coming out in the soul state, but he just did this action, shameless, who has the nerve to say that he is sexually indifferent, for 12 hours. Fatty, I'm such a bad person. When he and his girl were having sex, Fatty really wanted to give him 100 ghosts night walk and add fuel to his fire. You were still afraid of being beaten, so you didn't do it, the monk decisively added the blow. Fatty. When did you break through to a high level? The monk began to ask about business. It's almost time. I already broke through in the last story world, but it was unstable because I relied on several other formation mages to pass on their power to me to force a breakthrough, and then it fell back again, Fatty said. How are you preparing for the sermon? I'm not ready yet. I still need some time. It's still early. It's better not to be in a hurry. You just can't be in a hurry about this matter. The monk sighed. A person with Dabai's character has endured for so long for the most perfect enlightenment. Monk, if you continue to water the flowers like this, I'm really afraid that you will suddenly turn into a human body one day. The Buddha can cut meat and feed it to the eagles, but what does it mean for this poor monk? The monk seemed very free and easy. What's more, how much energy does your soul absorb from me every day? These flowers and plants of this poor monk have changed. It must be a little wilted. Thanks to you, monk, I don't dare to suck other people's fat men, for fear of being turned into a puppet. In the end the fat man floated in front of the monk again, made a cute expression, and said, I'm cuter than those flowers and plants, right? The monk said nothing. Silence was the best answer. Buddha came back from outside at this time, and there were still some traces of stream water on his body. He must have taken a bath in the stream just after practicing. He picked off a petal, put it in his mouth and chewed it gently. Okay, now everyone in the temple is drinking your blood and eating your flesh. The fat man shook his head, then slowly floated to the Buddha's side and asked, Lord Buddha, tell me, you use your state of mind to advance to the advanced audience level last time? You've also been a fae for a while, and you've even smoked that thing, so your boyish body must have been broken, right? Since he was temporarily inhumane, Fatty has become particularly sensitive to this matter. With Sudbai's 12 hours of experience, Fatty is extremely eager to regain some confidence and gain some satisfaction. Of course, find two monks, it is indeed a bit shameless to get this satisfaction from them. Buddha took out the hatchet and began to sharpen it. He did not use a whetstone to sharpen the knife, but directly used the palm of his hand to sharpen the knife. Demonic flames rose up like flames in a furnace. This demon flame has natural restraint on the soul body. The fat man smiled sarcastically and could only run away cowardly. The daily life in the small temple is still so peaceful and harmonious. Everyone has lived in Lao Fang's house in Shanghai for a long time, so they have developed the same habits in how they get along with each other. The little guy was sitting on the bed in the bedroom watching cartoons. Ji Xiang was held in his arms. One person and one cat were very harmonious. The fat man couldn't tease the monk and Buddha. At this time, he actually floated into the bedroom to tease the little guy. Of course, there was actually another person in the small temple, and that was Sunur, but the fat man didn't regard Sunur as his own. And it's really not convenient for Sunur to bother him at this time. Xiaoxian, your godfather is here to see you. The fat man's soul floated in. Ji Xiang glanced at the fat man and remained indifferent. The little guy was very proud and jumped on the fat man's body. The fat man's soul has become substantial. It feels soft to the touch, like marshmallows. The little guy likes it very much. Hey, be good. The fat man was really nice to the little guy. As the fat man said, he might not have the chance to leave anything behind, which is equivalent to treating Sudbai's child as his own. The most important thing is that Fatty now finds that he seems to have lost the ability to save seeds, which is the most annoying thing. Be good, Xiaoxian, do you know that your father has found a stepmother for you? Just like the queen in Snow White, your father will not like you in the future, and they will have their own children. This joke seems to be played on children by every relative and friend. But the little guy didn't seem to care, as if he didn't understand, and continued to watch his own animation while clinging to the fat man's spirit. But Fatty believes that the little guy can definitely understand it. Even though he is just a child or even an infant, the wisdom and perception of the soul boy are unimaginable by ordinary people. You really don't care, the fat man started to fan the flames again. Ji Xiang on one side opened his mouth as if yawning. The little guy continued to watch the anime and danced along with the anime plot from time to time. Fatty felt so lost, like a deflated balloon, and his spirit was also a little sluggish. The little guy looked at the fat man in surprise, as if he thought his originally comfortable mattress was leaking air. It would be great if you were really my son. You would be so considerate. You wouldn't even care if your own father went out to find a woman, the fat man said to himself. He found that he could not compare with Sudbai in any aspect except being fat. The little guy seemed to understand what he said and shook his head. The fat man was even more hurt. At this time, two old people were walking on the hillside outside to support each other. The old lady supported the old man. The two seemed not in good health, but they were still very healthy mentally. The monk put down the kettle in his hand. The fat man's soul also immediately expanded. Even Buddha, who was sharpening his knife, stopped moving. Old man, am I right? This temple was just built. It must not have existed before. It's really a new temple. The old man and the old man continued to walk up. What they didn't know was that there were 3 people in the small temple who had been watching them. When the 2 elders walked to the door of the small temple, the old man and the old lady clasped their hands together very seriously. Amitabha. This is a Buddhist believer. The monk looked at Buddha on one side. Buddha smiled and indicated that he was not ready. The fat man in the room was a little discouraged because Mao was not a Taoist believer. The monk adjusted his clothes and did not go out to greet him. Instead, he walked to the Buddha statue. There are people worshipping in the temple. What do you worship? It's Buddha. There are no monks in the temple. There is only Buddha. They come. It's to worship me. The monk's body was filled with layers of golden light. Someone comes to worship Buddha. Then he will become a Buddha. There is no Buddha in the world. The Buddha said that all living beings are suffering. If all living beings need a Buddha, there will be a Buddha. If all living beings do not need a Buddha, there will be no Buddha. This is the true Buddha. What does the monk put his hands together? Dharma is solemn. In an instant, Buddha's light flourishes. The sound of Sanskrit floats. Today, a poor monk becomes a Buddha. Promise. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Disyao. Chapter 1085. Ordinary people worship Buddha and seek gods, often with great utilitarianism. Gods and Buddhas all over the sky were created because they were needed. This is true for theistic systems of both the East and the West. Therefore, there is no Buddha in the world, and it is very difficult for the audience to continue to maintain their original beliefs. In the world of broadcast stories, the Jade Emperor, Tathagata, and Buddha can all be transformed into NPCs or gatekeeper bosses for you. Under such circumstances, who can continue to maintain their original beliefs? Faith comes from awe and mystery. Once these things are gone, it will be difficult to continue to form so-called faith, and the system it originally relied on will collapse instantly. Therefore, in fact, a long time ago, the monk chose his own path. What he cultivated was the Buddha, and he also cultivated himself. When he worshipped the Buddha, he did not serve those illusory gods, but served himself. For this reason, the monk would go through thousands of years to absorb all the masters of Qinglong Temple, because he felt that he was a Buddha, and those masters were his masters in name, but in fact he was the master. The best destination for them is to integrate the objects of their faith into themselves. After all, to be able to enter the bliss of the West and always be by my Buddha's side is the greatest honor and the most anticipated outcome for a Buddhist monk. Therefore, the monk deceives his master and destroys his ancestors without any psychological pressure. Even Fatty started to be a Tianzun himself not long ago, simulating the so-called incarnation. In fact, he is also following the path of a monk. Nowadays, the monk has lost his previous life because of Sufu, but only by giving up can he gain. Without the fetters of the previous life, he will be more pure, just like the first emperor who created the emperor. To do it, be the first in ancient and modern times. People. Some people worship Buddha. It's just an opportunity. Just like Zhang Taigongs, those who wish to take the bait, when the opportunity comes, everything will fall into place. The monk uses his own essence and blood to cultivate flowers, plants, and trees. This is not a sign of giving up on himself, but a sign of letting go. Only by letting go of obsessions can one truly achieve oneself. As for how much he can pick up after giving up so much, it all depends on chance. In the final analysis, the monk was still hurt by Sufu that time, otherwise he would have been guaranteed to get more and get more. Now, he is just for the sake of preaching, and there will no longer be that time when he suppressed himself to advance to the advanced audience. Absolute purpose. Certainly. The monk is proud enough to be able to achieve enlightenment smoothly under Sufu's care. After all, just as there is only one old rich man, there is only one special case like Subai. The former is the son of the plain, and the latter is the most powerful person in the world today. The well-deserved second generation, and the monk, can only rise from the grassroots, and the difficulty is of course different. The two old men bowed in front of the temple door and then walked into the temple. The old woman still held the incense candle in her hand. At this time, the fat man wisely changed the layout of the small temple so that the two elders could only see the Buddha statues and temples when they came in. Otherwise, when they came in, they would find a hodgepodge of Chinese Buddhism, Tantric Buddhism, Taoism, etc., which would be unsightly. This can be regarded as a smooth move. Fatty is already used to being hit, so it doesn't matter anymore and he can see it. The two elders knelt down in front of the Buddha statue. They were devout Buddhists and began to recite some scriptures and ask for the Buddha's blessing. Immediately, 2 rays of Buddha's light entered their bodies, which helped them to regulate their bodies. Then, the 2 elders fell asleep and were sent down the mountain wrapped in Buddha's light. The original Buddha statue where the 2 elders were kneeling before them slowly became clear at this moment, and finally, it transformed into the shape of Kilua. Buddha stood by the door frame holding a hatchet in his hand, as if watching the excitement, while the fat man came to the temple entrance with the little guy in his arms, waiting to see the monk ascend. The little guy was very excited about the glittering gold in front of him and clapped his hands from time to time. However, the expected earth-shattering momentum did not appear. The way things are going is quite like a big thunder but little rain. Not to mention the last time Subai achieved enlightenment, even the auras emitted by those who have achieved enlightenment recently are incomparable. The fat man even thought that the monk's aura of enlightenment could make it out of Sichuan. Guanghua began to be restrained at this time. Everything begins to become dull. What does the monk put his hands together? His face is warm. He read. Amitabha. For a moment, a red light spot flashed in front of his forehead. Golden body shaping. The Buddha's body is restored. There is no vigorous excitement, everything is just a slow and silent flow of moisturizing things. It's like all the dust has been washed away, and what's left is nothing more than a formality, a transitional scene, and the monk has never cared so much about this. It's like drinking a cup of tea and realizing this truth. It's a bit casual and a bit too serious. After doing the foreplay for a long time, I just rubbed it and it seemed like it really came out. The monk walked down slowly. The temperament is ethereal, and it seems to be no different from before. It's a real loss for those who have attained this sermon. The fat man smacked his lips. Look at Dabai's sermon, and then look at monk. You have been admitted to university this time, so what's the thank you banquet? The second generation is more generous. The monk didn't care about this, smiled and said, it is an unexpected joy to be able to realize the Tao. There is no need to force the rest. Are you really not asking for it or are you pretending not to ask for it? Buddha suddenly asked at this time, you are forcing me to use demons to prove the Tao. The fat man was stunned for a moment, feeling that there was something in what these 2 people were saying, but even with the fat man's wisdom, he could not figure out what was behind it. After all, he was not a Buddhist. Are you wronged? The monk looked at Buddha. Disdainful Lord Buddha looked a little cold. There are few true Buddhas in the world, but demons exist in everyone's heart. In fact, it's easier for me. And, thanks to your reminder, otherwise I wouldn't have thought of that. Stop playing riddles and tell me. The fat man came over shaking his head. Amitabha, the poor monk was also reminded by the fat man. He disguised himself as a Taoist master, absorbed the Taoist luck into his body, and refined the incense on his own. The poor monk is like this now, enlightening the Tao in the most ordinary way, and gaining the most purely yourself, then travel around, go to temples and temples in various places to collect their incense and beliefs, integrate them into yourself, and achieve true freedom. Damn it, isn't this robbery? The fat man finally understood. There are very few ancient temples and temples in the world that have real heritage and connections with Buddhism. Most of them are money-making institutions with severe commercial erosion, but the monk has not planned to do so yet. Let it go, and plan to make a complete cleansing. He is a Buddha, he is an ancestor, this has nothing to do with time or the time before and after birth. Now he is a Buddha, and those things related to the Buddha belong to him, so he goes to pick up things, instead of stealing something. As for what the Buddha said, his was gone, which meant that after the monk picked it up, the Buddha who had just attained enlightenment later had no more soup. He could only use demons to attain enlightenment. At that time, he could also capture some demons and enter his body. Both of them have the image of enlightened monks, but what they do is more domineering than the other. They are simply more like robbers than robbers. Without further ado, the monk goes to clean up and bow, and will leave tonight. Dab, I should be back in the afternoon, and I just want to say goodbye to him. The monk went to his room. Buddha shook his head. He didn't know how it felt to have his share of the pie taken away by the monk. Perhaps what he said about using demons to prove the Tao was more of a helpless expression, but there was nothing that could be done about it. There are only so many things, not enough for two people, so it is better to make it for one person first. The fat man hugged the little guy and returned to the room. The little guy was looking at the comic strips, and the fat man was in a daze next to him. Dabai has attained enlightenment, the monk has attained enlightenment, Buddha is probably going to be there soon. Damn, I'm the only one left, I have to hurry up. Suddenly, the fat man seemed to have thought of something. He remembered that several times, things touched by the little guy ended up being opportunities for Dabai. The same was true for Yuruyi last time. Hey, this little guy has a lot of secrets. Even if he can't fight, he doesn't seem to have much strength, but if he uses it well. The fat man shook his head again. No, this matter has to be discussed with Dabai when Dabai comes back, and this is not the past. At that time, he could steal the little guy out to hand in the task, but now he will let the fat man do it because of his relationship with the little guy. He really can't do anything other than take advantage of others. When Dabai comes back, let's discuss it with the child's father. Are you still reading comics? The fat man came over. At this time, he felt that it was necessary to deepen his relationship with Su Yuxuan. In the past, Dabai had taken advantage of it. As his godfather, he hoped to share some of the broth. The little guy was lying on the carpet, and in front of him was a hardcover version of the Journey to the West comic book. This thing was quite expensive, but the fat man was willing to give it up, since he only had a godson anyway. Daddy. The little guy stretched out his hand, pointed at Sun Wukong in the illustration and shouted. Ha ha ha. The fat man laughed. Okay, your dad is a grandson, very vivid. The monkey jumped out of the stone. He is a perfect match for your dad. Without dad, there would be no chance. Mom. The fat man smiled unkindly beside him. Immediately afterwards, the little guy's finger pointed at Tang Seng again, and then the little guy put his hands together and made a gesture. Are you talking about the uncle monk? The fat man nodded. It really looks like him. He is serious and likes to talk about truths, and he also manipulates his apprentices to do his bidding in various ways. It's okay. Then the little guy pointed at Monksha and made a knife-wielding gesture again. This is your uncle Buddha, a boring gourd, a boring and coquettish man, a perfect match. The fat man suddenly stopped laughing. Damn it! 3 of the 4 masters and disciples have returned to their positions. Then I still have. The fat man immediately picked up the little guy. Good boy, Uncle Fat will take you to eat ice cream. Let's not read this comic for now. We'll read it later. We'll read it later. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 1086. In the magnificent military camp, hundreds of thousands of troops are exercising and training. Their hairstyles and clothes are all models of the Qin Army. Qin Army instructors are responsible for training in each area. Su Fu once said that he not only wanted to defeat Broadcast in this world to complete his revenge, but also wanted to make the Qin reappear in this world. At the moment, cultivating new people, instilling them with Qin Army physical training techniques, and teaching them Qin army military formations will not be of much help to the decisive battle that will soon come. This is a long process, but it shows Su Fu's determination. He didn't think that he would lose, nor did he think that he would lose. When losing means complete annihilation for you, then losing means nothing to you to think about and linger about. There is a tower in the center of the military camp. The tower is empty except for a futon. At this time, Su Fu is sitting cross-legged on the futon. On the left side, there is his whisk, and on the right side, there is a set of white clothes. And directly in front of Su Fu, there was a drop of blood essence floating. This essence and blood is very weak, with no soul breath in it. It is a very pure essence and blood. It is inherited from a great figure, but it cannot carry out body snatching and regeneration. It's just a drop of blood. A drop of blood from the first emperor. The ancestral dragon has fallen long ago, a complete fall, with no possibility of resurrection. This drop of essence and blood cannot regenerate an ancestral dragon, but the new great Qin needs the blood of the ancestral dragon to continue. For Su Fu, it is not difficult to use this drop of blood as a medium to find a mother in this world to cultivate and give birth to a baby with the blood of the ancestral dragon. De Qin's bloodline must be pure, otherwise everything he has will lose its meaning. Most of the princesses and princes under Zilong's command in the past died in the battle, and the eldest prince Fusu, who was kept as a backup, has also disappeared. This matter is imminent for Su Fu. The army of Great Qin only fought for the ancestral dragon and its bloodline. Not to mention those soldiers, even Su Fu himself longed for the bloodline and descendants of the ancestral dragon to come as soon as possible. But all this cannot be rushed. After everything is settled, let's create a successor. Su Fu stood up, his fly whisk flying up, and the sound of the Great Qin army's formations being drilled could be heard all around, making him feel as if he had returned to the era he was in 2000 years ago. At that time, the Qin dynasty was at its peak of military warfare, sweeping across the land, barbarians collapsed, and various places surrendered. The glory of the past is destined to be restored in his own hands. There is no need for too much emotion or too much lamentation. Su Fu doesn't know when darkness will come again, but he is already prepared for it. It is nothing more than a fight and nothing more than death. If you win, you will live forever. If you lose, you will follow the ancestral dragon. We will meet the ancestral dragon again in the underworld. Whoa! The sound of a military bugle suddenly sounded, which meant that there was an emergency military situation. Su Fu's eyes turned cold. He knew clearly that the next batch of lackeys from the darkness had not yet arrived. Now the so-called countries near the area he occupied had been defeated by him. If there were not more important things, he would not let go. Slow down the pace of their own attacks, and those other countries dare not take the initiative to provoke at this time. The current military situation is just the news about those few fish that have slipped through the net. Even Su Fu admired the training of the lackeys under the dark opponent. They were really difficult to deal with, especially when they hid and even he couldn't figure out their specific location. This feeling, like a lump in the throat, is very uncomfortable. Although the few fish that slip through the net are still seriously injured, sooner or later they will lick their wounds and wait until the next batch of darkness comes. The military information was sent to Su Fu. Su Fu glanced at it with his spiritual consciousness, his eyes immediately focused, and he said in a deep voice, "Gather troops. The Sea of the Dead is the place of exile in this world. This world is very large, much larger than the original world, and it accounts for more than 80% of the land area, so there are many more species and populations than the original world. The Sea of the Dead is just like the Urhai Lake. It cannot be called a sea, it is just a kind of lake. Because this is a place where undead dark creatures gather, it can be regarded as one of the most dangerous places in the world. Originally, there were several sea lords guarding here, and their combat power was not inferior to the big ones. However, After the audience attacked again and again in the early stage of the broadcast, they have long since fallen, and the minions below have been leaderless for many years. A huge Suanwoo was floating in the sea of the dead. There were traces of damage all over Suanwoo's body, which looked very shocking. However, this was still how it looked after it had recovered for a long time. Before that, he didn't even have a skeleton. In Suanwoo's belly, an old man wearing a bamboo hat sits cross-legged. He is absorbing the death energy of the sea of the dead to restore himself. Fortunately, this world has not been successfully taken over by the broadcast, otherwise these places will definitely be transformed, and he will also. It's impossible to find such a good place to recover. At this time, the old man in the hat actually still misses the feeling of being pulled into the story world by the broadcast. No matter how serious the injury is, he can recover quickly. There is no need to repair his body bit by bit as slowly as now. He didn't know how long he could hide here, but he knew better that there was no other place in the world that was more suitable for him to recover than here. He was reluctant to leave. At this time, on the other side of the Dead Sea, a woman walked slowly on the sea. The old man in the bamboo hat stood up suddenly, Suanwoo's body suddenly turned, and huge waves rolled up in the Dead Sea. If you weren't hiding, why did you come to me? The implication is that it is okay if everyone is scattered and hiding. Once they gather together, the target will be bigger and it will be easy to be discovered. Lychee's face turned a little pale. Obviously, her injuries had not recovered well, but she was still slowly approaching the huge Suanwoo. I have something to do with you. What's the matter? The old man in a bamboo hat slowly got up on his knees and began to shrink his body. I'll lend you the turtle shell. Lychee held up one hand, and a ray of light appeared from behind him. Then, it turned into a huge sword and was down, like a giant sword coming from the sky. Facing Lychee's sudden attack, the old man in the bamboo hat was simply stunned. Is she crazy? At this time, if you don't find a place to hide and recover from your injuries, waiting for the opportunity. But he suddenly came here to deal with himself? Boom. This was a sneak attack, because the old man in the hat did not expect that Lychee would sneak attack in this situation, so he was really unprepared at first, because anyone with a normal mind knows that at this time, there is really no chance. The need for internal strife. Everyone is a lost dog, why bother making things difficult for each other? Suanwoo's already damaged turtle shell was cut open directly at this time, and the old man in the bamboo hat roared. He did not intend to fight Lychee here, because it would definitely attract the Qin soldiers. He wanted to leave and distance himself from this crazy woman. Keep it as far as you can. However, next moment, the entire Dead Sea began to roll at this time. The undead souls that had been trembling in front of Suanwoo these days suddenly became extremely ferocious at this time. They came one after another, entangled with Zhu Suanwoo's huge body. Even if Suanwoo moved a large part of them, they would be killed, but there were so many of them, it was like a huge number of ants crawling up the body of an elephant. Here. The old man in the bamboo hat was so surprised that he couldn't speak. He found the most suitable place for him to recover from his injuries. It turned out that this woman had placed a ban on her a long time ago. This woman actually made these preparations before Qin Bing woke up. Originally, I didn't plan to use it against you, but I'm sorry, you caught up. A blood stain opened on Lychee's forehead, and the Dead Sea began to split. What split with it was the body of the old man in the hat. The entire Dead Sea had been refined by Lychee into his own magical weapon a long time ago, similar to how Lychee wiped out a city in England and forcibly absorbed 300,000 dead souls to form his own purgatory. But this time, Lychee plays bigger. Of course, it is also because she is freer and more powerful now than she was before. Your destiny is still on the radio. If you dare to kill me, the radio will kill you. The old man in the bamboo hat has absorbed too much of the death energy here these days, which is like actively letting the power of Lychee enter his body in disguise. Now, he really can't resist this woman on Lychee's home court. Click. The Suanweo began to crack. The eyes of the old man in the bamboo hat were bleeding. He roared madly and roared as hard as he could. He didn't expect that after living for so long, he would not die in the hands of the Qin army, but would fall into the hands of another audience. Crash. Suanweo's physical body began to collapse, and the old man in the hat once again dispersed into countless worms in an attempt to escape from his shell, but the massive undead in the Dead Sea began to bite and devour these worms desperately. The old man in the bamboo hat knew that this time. No chance. Lychee walked over slowly, stretched out her hand, and took off a palm-sized golden armor plate in the center of the Suanweo turtle's shell. This is what she needs, and it is also the most precious thing in Suanweo's body. Are you crazy? The dying consciousness of the old man in the bamboo hat roared and questioned. Lychee shook his head slightly. Yes, I have been crazy for a long time, and I have been crazy for a long time. Next moment, the old man in the bamboo hat completely disappeared into smoke. Lychee raised his head and looked at the sky above his head. In this sky, you are not there yet. My uncle, the dean. My aunt, the dean. Wait. Wait for him to come. We can be reunited. I have been looking forward to that day for too long. A painful twitching sensation appeared on Lychee's body, but she smiled softly. If you have the ability, just crush my fate. Crush it? Just take the initiative to release the poison you left on me. Do you dare?